Another Monday, another episode of the Ask Me Anything series. I hope you all had a great weekend. I do want to say thank you for all the support you've been showing this series from the beginning of the series until now. If you keep showing the love like you have been, I'm definitely going to continue to do this every Monday. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you who took the time to come up with the question and leave it on the post. Even the ones that don't get featured in the video, just know I read every single one and I appreciate all of you guys. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off this week's episode with the first question from Dusty Prod, who says, with the Knights' hot start, Jack Eichel has been back to his elite self. Do you think he will sustain his point per game pace or even reach 100 plus points? And thank you for the support. I definitely do think this pace is sustainable for Jack Eichel. This is the kind of player that he was, before the trade to Vegas, before the whole neck surgery and all that kind of stuff. I mean, in 1920, this is a guy who finished 10 points over a point per game. It is kind of crazy to think that not only has he not had a 100 point season in his career yet, he's not even cracked 90 points yet, which I kind of expect to change this year. This is easily the most talent that Jack Eichel has ever been surrounded by. This is definitely the best team he's ever played on. As long as he stays healthy, I'm kind of expecting him to put up career highs across the board this year. It's really nice to see him back playing at such an elite level. The next question we have comes from Salty Wings and Avs fan, who says, thoughts on the Sabres? This team feels different compared to the last couple of hot starts in years past. I get 2018 Devils vibes with a possible playoff berth. They got the coaching and X factors with Dahlin coming into his own, and also I appreciate the kind words. I definitely agree with you on the fact that they feel different from years past, like the past couple of years. Like you said, they've started hot, but even when that was happening, it felt like a fluke. It didn't feel like it was sustainable whatsoever. It doesn't feel like they're just fluking their way to these wins this year. They don't have a bad team. They got a ton of guys that are really coming into their own. Obviously, Rasmus Dahlin is the big one, but Tage Thompson is proving that last season was not a fluke. Victor Olofsson is off to the best start of his career. Alex Tuch looks great. Owen Power's two-way game has been fantastic. He does not look like a rookie out there. The one thing that does worry me about the Sabres is goaltending. Craig Anderson has been fantastic. He's been really good in the 4 games he's appeared in, but he's only played in 4 games, and that's because I don't think Buffalo wants to rely on this guy so much because, I think he's the oldest player in the NHL right now, isn't he? Their ideal scenario would be have Eric Comrie as the starter, get the majority of the games, but also have a reliable backup that you can count on here and there in Craig Anderson. But Eric Comrie's numbers haven't been great, so that is one thing that would worry me about the Sabres. So although I do feel like this is the best team the Sabres have had in a while, and they do feel different from years past, I still don't see them as a playoff team, but I also don't think they're just going to fizzle out into a team that just gets walked all over and be one of the worst teams in the league. I think this is a team that could be, hovering around 500 for the majority of the season. Moving along now to the next question. This one comes from Jalen, who says, what team has started out slow and is out of the playoffs that you fully expect to make the playoffs? And also really appreciate the kind words. I'll give you one from each conference. In the West, I feel like this is a pretty easy one. The Calgary Flames are currently on the outside looking in. They are 1 point behind the Blackhawks for the second wildcard spot. Ultimately, I do think the Blackhawks are going to fizzle out, and Calgary, even though they are in a little bit of a slump right now, they have a great team. I would be genuinely shocked if they miss the playoffs this year. Now, the Eastern Conference is a little bit tougher. I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Penguins. They're currently 4-6-2, 5 points behind the Rangers for third in the Metro, and also 5 points behind the Panthers for the second wildcard spot. The Penguins are a team that you can really just never count out. What's their playoff streak at now? 16, 17 years or something like that. They're a much better team than the way they're performing and the way they're playing right now and the results that they're getting. So ultimately, I do expect them to figure this out, and by season's end, I think they're going to find themselves in a playoff spot, but they definitely got some work to do, especially in that Metro division, which is really tough. If they get into the postseason, I think it's likely going to be in a wildcard spot, not in one of the top 3 spots in the division. Next up, this question comes from Gotham K, who says, Leafs have played amazingly defensively against the Bruins and Canes. Do you think this is due to Shalgren being in net, or just the Leafs making the right plays? And also really appreciate the support. I feel like maybe a little bit of it has to do with Shalgren being in net. When you have a guy with that little of experience between the pipes, you want to play tighter defensively, make his life as easy as possible, but also the Leafs just tend to get up for games against really good teams. The Leafs have notoriously been a team that plays down to their opponents if they're playing a team like Arizona, which we saw early in the season when they lost that game, and then they play up to the level of their opponents, which we saw this weekend with wins over Boston and Carolina. It definitely does look like the Leafs have got their mojo back a little bit though. Matthews has been scoring. I think this weekend was really big for that team's confidence, and they should definitely be able to build off of this. Moving along now, next up we have a question from Kneecaps King, who says, as the time of this post, Hampus Lindholm is 3rd in points right now for defensemen. Do you think he will maintain this, or do you think he will quickly fall off as well as Dahlin? And also really appreciate the support. Yeah, Hampus Lindholm has been a beast to start the season. He was one of my better draft steals in fantasy. I think I took him in the very last round of my fantasy draft because I needed a defenseman. I am am definitely expecting his production to come down, though. I won't say fall off, because I think he's still going to be a really impactful defenseman for the Bruins, but this isn't a guy who's been known as like an offensive defenseman throughout his career. I don't even think he's ever had like a 40-point season. And also, whenever Charlie McAvoy comes back in early December, I think it is, McAvoy, I would have to imagine, is likely going to replace Lindholm on that top power play unit, so that should lead to him getting a little bit less points. So it's definitely been an amazing start to the season for Lindholm, and he's a really good two-way defender, but I don't expect him to keep this pace up. I think ultimately, by season's end, he's probably not going to be anywhere all that close to top 5 in terms of points by a defenseman. The next question we have comes from Gibby, who says, if the NHL were to change their playoff format, would you rather have the 24-team playoffs or the play-in tournament like the NBA is doing? And also, thank you for the support. If I had to choose between those two formats, I would easily go with the play-in tournament. I think 24 teams getting in would just be a little bit too much, but in my opinion, the play-in tournament just makes the end of the season so much more exciting, especially for those fringe playoff teams. And we know how commissioners of major sports leagues feel about tanking. I also feel like having a play-in tournament would prevent teams from doing that as often, and it would try to make them as competitive as possible, because even if you finish as a 9-10 seed in your conference, you could still have a shot to get in the play-in tournament. Moving along now, this next question comes from Gavin, who says, do you think the Mitchell Miller incident will have an effect on the Bruins? They lost the day they signed him, and also really appreciate the support. This whole situation is honestly one of the stupidest and most pointless moves I've ever seen a general manager make in my life. Like, it just made the Boston Bruins look so bad, and for what? Because they just ended up releasing him anyways. Even when they signed him, the stuff Don Sweeney was saying, I was like, what is he talking about? Like, why would he have signed him then? Like, I think one thing he said, I'm not sure if Mitchell Miller did that to my kid, I could ever forgive him. He also said, I'm not even sure if this is the right decision. So if you have those kind of questions, why did you make the signing in the first place? And like I said, they ultimately ended up releasing Mitchell Miller after what, like a day or two, because apparently they found out new information after doing their due diligence and looking into a little bit more, but I don't really believe that. I think that's a pile of crap, to be honest. The way that looks to me is the Boston Bruins saw all the criticism and all the backlash that they were getting and said, we just don't even want to deal with this, and that is what led to them releasing Mitchell Miller. I don't think they found out any new information or anything like that, because that is the stuff you're supposed to do before you sign the player. You're supposed to do this, research and look into things before you make the signing. So that whole situation was just so pointless and easily avoidable. You just didn't have to make that signing. It just made the whole organization look so bad. I think Patrice Bergeron also had a quote where he wasn't a fan of the move, so that definitely could have played a part in Boston losing the day that signing was made, because it was probably just a big distraction for everybody. The next question we have comes from Blues Twos King, who says, this is like the 5th time I've asked this already, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on Leah Hextall and all the hate she receives. So for those of you who don't know who Leah Hextall is, she's a lead commentator for ESPN, obviously commentates NHL games, and yeah, every time she's commentating a game, I see a lot of things going around about her on Twitter. Most of those things are not nice things, which I'm not really a fan of. Like, first off, let me just say, yeah, she's not a good commentator. I think a lot of people would agree with me on that, but that doesn't mean she's a terrible person. That doesn't mean you need to go like attack her character and all things like that. I'm definitely not a fan of her commentary though, and I'll just leave it at that. Like, I'm sure you guys all seen the clips going around of the shootout the other day between Anaheim and San Jose, where she didn't even really know what the score of the shootout was. Erik Karlsson had to score to tie it, but she said if Erik Karlsson scores here, it's over and the Sharks win. And then I think it was Stolarz in net for the Ducks. He made a save, and she was kind of silent, and then she was just like Stolarz with a little fist bump. Like, the whole thing was kind of just a mess. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I'm not a fan of her commentary, but I'm also not a fan of the people that say, really terrible things about her on Twitter just because she isn't a great commentator. Moving along now, next up, do you think Husso should win the starter job in Detroit? Ned had a good game against the Rangers last night, but Husso has been more consistent and has 2 shutouts this year. I'm really impressed with the play, minus their 2 blowout games, and also really appreciate the kind words. I definitely think it's safe to say at this point, although it's still early in the season, Husso has been the much better goaltender, and he should be playing in the more important games. He should be looked at as this team's starting goaltender. For the first couple weeks of the season, Detroit was religiously going back and forth. Husso would get a start and Ned would get a start, and they just keep rotating, but I think now Husso has started back-to-back games on 2 different occasions. He's been an absolute beast for the Wings so far. I don't expect him to maintain these numbers for the entire season. Like, I don't think he's going to have a 940s plus save percentage all year, but he's definitely been one of the better goaltenders in the league early on here. He's already stolen Detroit a couple of games. Next up, from Crane Hook 47, despite a poor start from Vancouver, Bo Horvat has been brimstone blazing hot the past week or two, 3 straight multi-goal games, 10 goals on the year already. Would you re-sign him, or is he a better asset to the Canucks by trading? What do you think his contract value would be, whether re-sign or free agent market, or what type of package could you see him hauling in for Vancouver should they explore the trade market? This is pretty much the same situation they already went through with JT Miller. And honestly, at this point, although Bo Horvat is the captain of the Canucks, he's been there for his entire career and he's performing really well this season, I honestly do feel like he would be a better asset for them if they decide to go the trade route. I definitely think that would set them up and put them in the best position for the future. And we've already heard rumors and reports like the past couple of years that the locker room is divided and there's basically two leadership groups, one led by Bo Horvat and one led by JT Miller, and they kind of butt heads sometimes. Miller's already locked up to the long-term extension. I honestly think it would be a mistake if they do the same thing with Bo Horvat. In terms of his contract value, like if he maintains this pace all season long, which could definitely happen, we see guys have career years in their contract year all the time. I think this is a player who could easily demand, upwards of $7.5 million a season, maybe even more than $8 million a season. In terms of a trade package though, if they look to move this guy at the deadline and he's still scoring and producing numbers at this pace, he plays a premier position as well at center ice, this is a guy who could get a massive return. Obviously, I think the conversation starts with a first round pick, maybe a second round pick as well, or like a first round pick and a couple of really solid prospects, something along the lines of that. So those are kind of my thoughts on the whole situation. I think it would benefit Vancouver more in the long run if they do decide to trade him, but I'm really interested to hear what Canucks fans have to say about this. So if you're a Canucks fan, feel free to let me know your thoughts on the whole Bo Horvat situation down below in the comments. The next question we have comes from Redeem, who says, I remember you said you didn't like the Red Wings power play in past years, and after watching yesterday's game against the Rangers, I have to ask, what do you think now? The power play this season is definitely much improved. It's night and day from years past, but I don't even think it's as much like the new systems they're running and the new things they're doing as it is just the new personnel. And the guys I'm referring to, Dominic Kubalik and David Perron, both of those guys are power play specialists, and I think they are the big reason why we've seen such an improvement from the Red Wings power play this year. They're both threats to shoot on the flanks, and they also open up passing lanes because they're threats to shoot. And after Kubalik and Perron have both scored goals from the flanks on the power play this season, now since then, they've both had a couple of really nice assists where they like fake a shot and then they'll throw a backdoor pass to a guy like Lucas Raymond, or in the case of last night's game against the Rangers in overtime, it was actually David Perron throwing that backdoor pass to Dominic Kubalik. So those two guys, I would honestly say, are the biggest reason for Detroit's improvements on the power play, and it's been really nice to see. And now for the final question of this week's episode, this one comes from Sports and Stuff, who says, with Samsonov and Murray hurt, do the Leafs trust who they have, or do they make a move for a big name goalie? Honestly, I hope they lose a bunch, but I'm curious of your thoughts. Let's go Red Wings. I definitely can't see them making a move for a goaltender, and Samsonov's injury, luckily it's not supposed to be as bad and as long term as Matt Murray's, but I think they just kind of ride things out here with Erik Källgren and now Keith Petruzzelli, who they just signed to an NHL deal, former third-round pick by the Red Wings in 2017. Petruzzelli has been an absolute beast in the AHL so far this season, a perfect 6-0 record, rocking a .922 save percentage, so it looks like he's going to get an opportunity to start a game here soon, maybe even in the Leafs next game. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see, how this tandem of Källgren and Petruzzelli works out until either one of Samsonov and Murray comes back. The Leafs goaltending luck has just been terrible over the past couple years, but I would also say it's a little bit self-inflicted, because when Kyle Dubas went out and got Peter Mrazek was coming off a season where he only played a handful of games, he dealt with injuries, and obviously Matt Murray, who he signed this offseason, also has a pretty notorious background of injuries, so you do kind of have to point the blame a little bit here at Kyle Dubas, but I also do just think it's really unlucky for Samsonov to go down too, especially. That just sucks, because Samsonov was playing so well for the Leafs, but we saw that they were able to beat a team like the Carolina Hurricanes with Erik Källgren in net. Källgren made saves when he had to, and the Leafs were really good defensively, so as long as they continue to play like that, I think they will be fine. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. Like I said at the beginning, huge thank you to every single one of you who took the time to come up with a question and leave it on the post. Be sure to keep an eye out on the community tab next weekend for the next post asking for questions for next week's episode. If you guys enjoyed this and you want to continue to see these every single week, be sure to drop a like on the video. That is the best way to show your support. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all soon.